Good morning. I'm John Olson. I'm the CRA officer for Goldman Sachs, and also was happy to serve as the chair of the conference planning committee for today's conference. And it's my pleasure to introduce our morning keynote speaker. Adrianne Todman is the 12th Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She's had a long and distinguished career in housing, the details of which are in her bio, which I will leave to you to review. But I wanted to highlight, there were a couple of paragraphs from her official biography that I wanted to share because they resonated with me, and I think also very much resonated with the mission of NAAHL, which is why we're so excited Adrianne's with us today. Excuse my cough. Deputy Secretary Todman has dedicated her career to improving people's lives and strengthening neighborhoods through housing and strong community development. She believes that we have a responsibility to confront housing insecurity, increase and preserve the nation's housing supply, eliminate housing discrimination, and support community resiliency, particularly following a natural disaster. And I particularly like that she has it that we have a responsibility for this, not just she has the responsibility working at HUD, but we collectively have that responsibility. So we're delighted to have her here with us today. After her remarks, I'll pop back up. Adrianne's agreed to sit for some additional questions and conversation after her remarks. But we're delighted to have her here today, so please help me welcome Adrianne Todman, Deputy Secretary of HUD.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm not quite sure if I'm double mic'd here or not, but you know, it's a great pleasure to be with you here this morning. I understand my good friend Chris shared some important data points about where we are in our housing arc, the story of the last 2.5 years. Our journey continues. Certainly, it's been a rocky one, continues to be. So I won't bore you repeating some of the things that he said. So I will focus on things that this administration has been doing in spite of some of these and sometimes because of this journey that we've been on. You know, I'll start by saying, I, for the past 6 years in this job and the job prior to this, had the opportunity to travel this country. I think I'm down to the Dakotas and Hawaii as the only states I have yet to visit. And I don't have to tell you all, as the folks who I think are believers in this work, that the challenge that we have just runs the spectrum in terms of income, in terms of geography, and it wasn't always that case. So there's nowhere where I haven't been where I've not heard about the college student who can't afford their first apartment and they have 2 or 3 roommates, or the renter who's poised to become a homeowner but still is running into challenges, or individuals who are our homeless neighbors trying very hard, some who are working, trying very hard to kind of keep it together. So the challenges are real, but one of the reasons that it brought me great joy to join this administration is this is a White House, this is a Secretary Fudge, who I bring greetings, who believes in helping and improving the housing condition of Americans across the country, no matter what they may be. We're not just rental focused, we're certainly focused on homeownership as well, and certainly helping our homeless neighbors. And it's worth saying because there will be a time, and I'm having conversations with some folks now inside of my ecosystem where this is the case, there will be a time when people are gonna forget that there was a pandemic, right? I mean, we're all sitting here in this room, mostly no mask. In a couple years, people are gonna actually forget this very anxiety-ridden dynamic that we all lived through together. And I say that to say, one of the things that I know that we are most proud of as an administration is all the work that we did to make sure that people during the pandemic stayed in their homes. as best we could. I think most folks don't think about that. It didn't make a whole lot of big headlines. It wasn't an accident. We've spent billions of dollars helping families pay their rent. We're spending billions now helping homeowners stay in their homes. HUD created a very aggressive loss mitigation waterfall and a forbearance process to help homeowners as they were going through their most challenging time. These are tools that worked, that this administration implemented. So it's important for me to start there to say, yes, there was a pandemic, and this administration did everything it could, and I will say succeeded, to help keep millions of Americans, whether they're being renters or homeowners, housed. But there's more to do. We turned our attention to how do we move into the future in an aggressive way. And earlier this year, the president released a housing supply action plan. I'm sure that all of you have read it, and there's, highlights and things that you want to ask me about today. But that was no small feat. Imagine every federal agency inside of the federal family who deals with any portion of the housing spectrum coming together and saying, this is our action plan, not a strategic plan, not our plan to pull together a focus group for the focus group to think about the plan. We do that well in DC. But an action plan. And it messaged three things. One was housing affordability through the increasing of supply is important to this administration. It told our folks on the Hill, our friends on the Hill, here are the resources that, if you truly are in line with our vision, that we need to do this to a great scale. And then third, it said, but we don't need to wait for Congress to act. We can do things inside of the administration to just move the ball. And we have been doing that. Just the other day, we provided a summary, a progress report on how we're doing. And I will say that, and I've been doing this for a little bit, I will say that the HUD and Treasury have probably not been as aligned as we are when it comes to housing affordability as I think we are right now. My counterpart and I, Deputy Secretary Adeyemo, we talk frequently about ways that we can keep energizing our teams and making sure that our programs are braided well. And it's working, right? I mean, just not too long ago, Treasury released, with HUD's assistance, some guidance and additional tips on how we all can use the state and local fiscal recovery funds as part of real estate gap financing. I think that's kind of a big deal because so many local leaders and state leaders have these funds that what a great way to repurpose how we deploy those funds in ways to keep pushing the affordability vision. We're working with the Department of Transportation. We both released at the same time a notice for NOFOs, rather, on how to make sure that housing and transportation, two important systems inside of communities, how can they work together in a more in a more coordinated way. So we both have NOFOs out there right now, asking all of you to give us ideas and to provide technical assistance to communities who want to do that. Treasury also finalized their income averaging rule, which I'm sure is of interest to many of you in here finally. See, some of you saying finally, yeah, but here we are. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that, because I know that's a critical, LIHTC's a critical tool for all of us to expand not just affordability, just housing writ large. But on the demand side, we know that some of our most vulnerable families need a little bit more help. And so this administration has done a great deal in terms of making sure that there is more subsidies out there for our lowest income families. For the first time in the history of the Housing Choice Voucher Program, since the 90s, we have a bump up in the number of vouchers available for Americans. Now, it's only 20,000 vouchers, which is a small number, not quite what we asked for, but it's a start. And I can say that while it's not a big number across the country, for that mom, for that aunt, for that grandfather, for that homeless individual who's going to get that voucher, it's everything. And ultimately, that is all of our goal. But we also provided 70,000 vouchers, and we have about over 50% leased up right now, targeted specifically to our homeless neighbors as a way to recognize that during the pandemic, a lot of communities had to quickly house individuals in homeless, whether in hotels, motels, other forms, and this was a way for folks to come out of those interim shelters and move into permanent units of their own. We're proud of that work as well. One of the things that we announced very recently, and this is a particular point of pride for me, is working with individuals who are homeless or at risk after a disaster. We think about housing supply in a very sort of community systemic way, but sometimes for all of us, some of the jolt, some of the financial shock that happens to families happens at a disaster point. And for any of you who are working in some of those federally declared disasters, you know of what I speak. So many homeowners and renters, particularly renters, trying to just build their lives back. And we are proud to be able to help individuals be rehoused with yet another tool. Homeownership is also an area that is very important to the president, vice president, but particularly our secretary, who sees the importance of making sure that we are, many of you, I don't know how many of you realize that the housing gap is bigger today than it was in 1968. 1968, even before the Fair Housing Act. The gap is broader today between white homeowners and black homeowners. That is not the history that I want to leave behind for my kids. We have to do more there, and our secretary has really challenged our entire team on ways that we can bring down barriers from down payment assistance to being a little bit more thoughtful about how we look at student debt in our underwriting. Really speaking to folks about our army of housing counselors that are out there, doing everything we can to make sure. Just last night she hosted, it was very cute, our house party at HUD, where it was really trying to generate interest and provide information to millennials and Gen Zs in a very audience-friendly way about our tools. And we received a lot of folks who attended, and I think got information that will change their lives and the economic situation for the rest of their life. One of the things that the president charged all of us to do across the government is to make sure that we were very thoughtful about looking at our underserved families who've been discriminated against for years and generations. And so racial equity is something that has been at the forefront of many of the things that we're doing in closing the homeownership gap, in how we're deploying our homelessness tools. And it's certainly something that is really important to the secretary as well. One example of that is some of the work that we've done on appraisal bias. Some of you may have heard of it. When the president heard that if you live in a black neighborhood, your homes are probably appraised at 20% lower than if you lived in a white neighborhood, he charged Ambassador Rice and Secretary Fudge to take a look at it, study it, but then let's create a plan on what we can do about it. And we did just that, and that report came out March of this year, and there are updates to that plan that we'll be releasing publicly very soon. But that is an example of a very intentional thing that seems almost like an afterthought for many. But when you think about the wealth that's been left on the court, all these years, one generation after another, it is something that I know the president said we have to do better. And we are. And we are. You know, One other thing that we are very thoughtful about is the way that we are encouraging our lending partners to look at special purpose credit programs. And some of you may know that it was just last December our General Counsel opined that in utilizing a special purpose credit program for real estate transactions did not run afoul of the Fair Housing Act. And I know that that's a barrier that had been communicated to us. And some of our banking partners have really come out strong and very proud of the work that they're doing, JP Morgan, Bank of America, others. But these are examples of things that I think are integrated in a way that is important for our time. So important for our time. You know, after incidents of summer of 2020, going through a pandemic, and there was this really racial reckoning that occurred across the country. Many folks in the private sector stood up and said, we need to do better as a country. And many folks are continuing to do that. And I know that one of the things that the Secretary would want me to share is that it is important that this journey that we are on not end because of time and space between what happened in summer of 2020 and where this country needs to continue to be. And I will say that's race. I will say that's making sure that our Americans in rural areas, that are low-income families, that are middle-class families who are still struggling, that they still need our collective help. And all of you here play a hand in this. Long after I'm Deputy Secretary, all of you here will have the ability to make sure that this journey that we are on continues to move forward in an equitable way, in a way that makes sense for communities, so that we are able to build back better from the damage wrought from this pandemic. I know that we are on a housing roller coaster. Again, I won't repeat some of the things that I know that Chris said, but it's imperative that we all lock in step, pay attention to what HUD is doing. We're trying very hard to remove barriers. We're listening to you about things that we need to do better so that we keep moving forward to make sure that this country continues to be a great place to live for my daughter, her children, and yours. Thank you all so much for this opportunity. I look forward to the fireside chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
So you started by talking about the spectrum of challenges, and after Chris's presentation, it certainly feels like there's headwinds everywhere you look. So tell us, how does HUD look at all of those factors and prioritize and focus? And what are your focus areas? Where do you start, given all these factors?
The challenge and benefit of working at the national level is that you have to prioritize a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
You have to. So we are trying to take care of families across the country in the entire housing arc. So whether you're a homeless individual, whether you're a renter who just struggles to pay rent, what can we do? Making sure there's more housing supply, helping to encourage ideas around starter homes. We know that there's a lack of folks being able to have their first home, and what are we doing? We're trying out new concepts and testing ideas like small dollar mortgages and small dollar loans. Nice. And we have a RFI in the street. I don't think the deadline has passed yet on barriers to lenders really using that as a tool, but particularly for some new models of housing in terms of manufactured housing, in terms of being in real estate areas that are not as aggressive, say, as San Francisco or New York. Like, how do we help all families sort of get into a home who wants to? And so we are charging ahead on all fronts.
Every chance you get.
We have to, because families will be left behind if we don't.
Yeah, that's great. The other story you told I thought was fascinating was your work with the Transportation Department. And one of the things we talk about a lot at NAAHL is that affordable housing happens in a context And you have to think about access to transportation, access to jobs, access to healthcare,
Schools.
school education, and all of those are different federal
Yes.
agencies. So tell us more about that. Like, are there other chances to work with other federal agencies? How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, certainly the work with transportation, the catalyst there was the infrastructure bill and some opportunities to just purpose some of the funds we received there in ways to really help communities and drive them toward that sort of like integration of thought. As it relates to labor, one of the things about being a deputy secretary that is one of my aha moments is just what a community of deputy secretaries we all are. There's really nothing else like us. And I'm sure the secretaries think the same thing, but there's nothing like there's.
But you're doing the real work, right?
Well, I'm not going to say that on camera, but we can talk after. But there's such a not just a community of practice in terms of what we do, but there's also just a community of folks who are figuring out how to charge. I mean, all of us came in last year focused on the pandemic and reentry, right? Like that was so much our charge. And not that we're beyond that, but we're now able to explore with each other things we can do creatively with each other. So this is all to say that, whether it's Treasury, whether it's Polly at Transportation, whether it's, Julie at Labor, Cindy at Education, we are constantly talking about ways that we can have our systems work better with each other. Some of the challenges, as some of you know, is how our programs complement each other or really repel each other. And so that's a barrier looking at what we can administratively do right now. But so much of the opportunities that we do have are built into resources that's in the American Rescue Plan and in the infrastructure and now in the Inflation Reduction Act. We're able to look at these pockets of money and really come together. My counterpart over at EPA and I were talking just the other day about how we can make sure that some of the funds that they have are able to be used in some of the more vulnerable neighborhoods that HUD has a footprint where they might have.
That's a key piece too. The environment is key to this conversation too.
That's critical. So so you have a community of individuals who not just work with each other but like each other, and I think that's a good thing as we try to move us forward.
That's helpful.
That's helpful. We all like each other, except for one.
Oh.
I'm just kidding. No, we all like each other. We're all good. We're all good.
So one thing, I do want to leave a couple of minutes for audience questions, but I want to dig into some tools. You mentioned you had some tools during the pandemic that worked. So I want to dig into the weeds a little bit on two FHA tools that work and where HUD is at with those two. So let's start with single-family mortgage insurance. So tell us about that. I know, it's been a story for some time about banks participating or not in that program. So what is HUD doing with FHA?
The secretary, the FHA commissioner, and I recognize that most of the lenders we have right now are non-banks, and we recognize and have been meeting with some leadership there to see what can we do better. What can we do to have the FHA be a product and a system and a process that is more amenable to introducing back some of our banking partners that are now sorely underrepresented when it comes to our mortgage lending. And so those conversations are continuing. I think that the scars of 2008 and 2009 are still with us, and we recognize that, but those conversations are still going on.
Great. And then the other tool is the multifamily risk sharing program, and whether there's any plans in the works to expand and open up that program to banks and CDFIs? Well,
we also recognize some of the challenges that our underwriting rules have, particularly for CDFIs. And actually, there's another request for information that's out there on that point. I think it's due early December.
Okay.
So we can provide that information to Buzz, and he can send it out.
I see Buzz making a note of it right now.
All right, excellent. Just to talk a little bit about how can we do better. I mean, CDFIs have not necessarily been a core audience of HUD's body of work, and this is another place where Deputy Secretary Adrianne and I have been talking about how can we, as a collective, look at introducing CDFIs into untraditional areas. And so it was part and parcel because of that partnership with Treasury that we at HUD decided to, well, let's understand what's happening in terms of CDFIs and their relationship with our department, and so that's why that's out there right now. But with the risk sharing, we're really excited with the work that we've been doing there, and we have I think we spent just over $1 billion and 9,000 units. In terms of progress, and I don't know if there are any HFAs that are here. If you're at the table, thank you so much. If you're not, come on in. The pool feels good on this side. So, but no, we're proud of that work.
That's great, and it sounds like there's a window for engagement and
absolutely
and comment on this too, which is
absolutely
great. That's super. Well, we just have a few minutes left. I imagine there are probably a couple of questions percolating in the audience. So let's turn. Does anyone have a question for Deputy Secretary Todman? I see one over here.
Hi, I'm Jack Markowski from Chicago. I was wondering, with the current, the rise in interest rates, the dramatic rise in interest rates, and Chris Herbert showed us that you now need 50% more to buy an average home. Is there anything HUD can do about that? And single-family mortgage insurance, anything you're talking about? That what can you do to kind of moderate that dramatic rise in interest rates?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, the increase in interest rates is certainly, creating a dynamic in two fronts. One is certainly our homeowners who are coming into the door for the first time, or potential homeowners, and certainly with impact on our loss mitigation and the work we're doing there in terms of families who are just trying to be able to resituate themselves with their mortgage debt. There is constant conversation that's going on in terms of a potential MIP cut. The FHA commissioner in her with her audience with the MBA, I think just last week, did signal that we are definitely looking at a potential MIP cut, and because we know that families are hurting, and we want to try to do as much as we can to sort of remove some of the cost barriers to homeownership. So stay tuned.
Good, thank you. I think we probably have time for one more. If there's one more question, I have another one or two in my pocket. But nothing else from the audience?
Everybody's shy, not enough coffee.
Right. Well, one thing I was going to ask you to say a few more words on is what Secretary Fudge is like. She seems great. So would love to hear more about.
So we have a wonderful relationship. I think we have the perfect balance to each other in terms of things that she's done in her career, the things that I've done in my career, and she's fantastic to work with. She absolutely is. I continue to learn from her about true north. Like what is our true north? What is our true north? And she is focused. She's one of the most focused human beings I have ever met, and so I think that helps, because HUD's mission is, how many folks out there, well, actually this audience might know, but let's pretend like you're not lenders. How many folks out there know that, we do healthcare facility financing, right? When I talk about that across, you guys would know, but when I talk to audiences that don't do what you do, they're like, what? You do what? So we have this amazing, complex, rich, comprehensive mission that it does take the focus of somebody like a Secretary Fudge to say, folks, here's our true north. And the unique nature of being a deputy secretary is, I am the chief operating officer. So we're true northing, but I've got to make sure that there's people and money and, plans for all that to happen. And so, we give each other the space we need to do what we need to, and then come together and lead the team. So it's been an amazing journey working with her. And I'll tell you what, for those of you who know the people in the administration, this has been sort of the A-team of housers and others who are working every single day. When you think about who's at OMB right now, when you think about who's inside the White House, who's at HUD, who's at Treasury, housing has been at the forefront of how we think about the administration's work from day one. And it's one of the things that energized me to join.
That's great. Well, that's a perfect note to end on. So thank you so much
thank you all so much.
for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Of course, my pleasure.